I'm one of the moderators. My name is Angel Lee. I am an assistant professor at OSU. I come from AGEM, so I focus on geriatric emergency medicine in operations and in research. And my co-moderator is Mia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mia Karamatsu. I'm a pediatric emergency medicine physician, so opposite end of the spectrum. I'm at Stanford University, and my focus is actually in physician wellness. I'm the director of physician well-being in our division of pediatric emergency medicine. Welcome, everyone.
Good to meet everybody.
Yes, so this will be an hour-long discussion about career longevity in academic emergency medicine. We have a wonderful panelist of emergency physicians that have been doing this for decades. I think that was one of our goals, to find people who were able to stay in this career for over 20, 30 years and be engaged and still be fulfilled, and how to balance that with life outside of work too. Because I think one thing that everyone really thinks about is during your training, you'll focus on getting to the next step. And then now that you're here, how does that step evolve? How does that direction? How do your resources and, that very limited bandwidth that you have, how do we continue to grow as people and as physicians? So in order to make more audience engagement, if Mia can go to the next slide.
Yeah.
We have a poll. We had 10 questions that we gave to our panelists, and we want you all to take a look at. I'll put that link also in our chat. I'll just put it up every few minutes as we go through introducing our panelists. And so please fill out and respond to which poll, which 3 questions you would really like to be answered that we have some dedicated time for. These are the 10 questions that we kind of curated based on different themes in terms of like wellness and mentorship. So I can start with introducing your panelists and we'll move forward.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. First one is Rita Sidilka. She has been practicing. I think you said you finished residency in 1984. Yes. So, and he was at the time of retirement, a tenured professor and vice chair at the Department of Emergency Medicine at Case Western Reserve University. She was on the SAEM board of directors and ABEM board of directors and was president of the board from 2007 to 2008. She's also won awards for advancement of women in emergency medicine. She's also an editor of Tintinelli, so we have all read her work and been influenced by things that she's done and supported. Outside of work, she is married with 3 adult children and with 2 grandchildren. And in her free time, there's this really great photo of her as a ship doctor on the National Geographic ships, these small expedition ships that travel around the world. And so I think you sent me a picture of is it a penguin?
Yeah.
Yes, because she couldn't respond to one of her emails or get to a Word document in time because she was having wonderful travels and adventures. All right. And for our next slide, we have Marianne Howie. She's a professor of emergency medicine at Northwell and the director of faculty development. She is a ABEM board oral examiner and a fellow, and she's taught extensively on a national, international level with various topics in emergency medicine. She's published extensively and talks a lot about how she raised 2 children to her 20s. And she and her husband are also now transitioning a lot of her care for the elder people in her family.
And then next we have Dr. Diane Krifko. She serves as the chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine at Medical University of South Carolina. Dr. Krifko has held progressive roles in medical education, wellness advocacy, and administrative leadership. She lives in Charleston, South Carolina, and has a wonderfully supportive husband of 21 years who is an engineering teacher. A recent empty nester, as of January, she moved her youngest daughter to VCU to pursue a forensic science degree. Her middle daughter attends SCAD in Savannah, Georgia, as an animation major, and her son is a welder who tortures her by riding motorcycles. She has 2 dogs and loves her 78 red convertible Beetle. And her favorite hobbies do not involve cooking or drinking wine. She would rather be on her boat listening to monster ballads, hanging out with her family, and taking care of her EM colleagues. Next, we have Dr. Luann Lawson. She is a senior associate dean for medical education and student affairs and a professor of emergency medicine at Virginia Commonwealth University School of Medicine. She has extensive experience in undergraduate medical education with a particular focus on curricular development, assessment, and team-based training. Previously, as principal investigator of the AMA Accelerating Change in Education grant at East Carolina University, Dr. Lawson led the development and implementation of key health system science initiatives, including the Teachers of Quality Academic Faculty Development Program, a health system transformation and leadership distinction track, and a longitudinal curriculum. Dr. Lawson has contributed nationally to medical education through her service on the USMLE, STEP number CCS Committee, National Board of Medical Examiners Emergency Medicine Advanced Clinical Exam Task Force, and as a past president of the Clerkship Directors in Emergency Medicine. She and her husband, an internist, have been married for nearly 29 years and are proud parents of 3 children. And then our 5th panelist, Dr. Yuen Wang, Nancy Yuen Wang, is an emeritus professor of emergency medicine and pediatrics at Stanford University, where she served as associate director of pediatric emergency medicine for over 20 years. She is dedicated to addressing health disparities and founded Stanford's Social Emergency Medicine section to identify and address patient social needs through the emergency department. Her work extends globally, having trained and collaborated with medical professionals in Mexico, Indonesia, and Ecuador. She researches disparities in specialty care access, trauma, and mental health while advocating for unaccompanied immigrant children through community partnerships and policy efforts. Currently, she serves as the faculty director of the REACH MD MS program in health equity research at Stanford. She's married to a physician and has 2 grown daughters. And so next slide will show our poll results. All right, so we have our top 3 questions that we can start with.
Yeah, let me go keep track of this. And then number
Yeah.
4. So we have 1, 2, and 4, it looks like our top questions. So we can start with the first one for the panelists, and then whoever wants to go first, feel like it. We're probably spending around, a few minutes for each question for everyone to answer. So first question is, how did you balance time between your career and your family during different stages of your career?
Okay, we can have Rita, do you want to go for, or Dr. Sidolka, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I think the most important thing for me was having lots of help. Like most of the other panelists, my husband is also a physician, and that helped a ton because he understood work hours and also understood all the work I was doing outside of work. We had somebody who came in to help out with the weird shifts so that there would always be someone here for the kids. And certainly when I was off, I tried to go to all the kids' things and, interact with them when we were home together. Having said that, I, like many other women of at least my generation, always felt like when I was at home, I should be doing something for work. And when I was at work, I should be doing something for home. So I'd love to say there's a way to perfectly balance life, but it's not true.
Ewan, would you like to go next?
First of all, I was not balanced, felt like a failure, felt kind of out of control. So just, balance is a relative term. But I think the main things when I take a step back is really knowing what you want and need and value at different stages. So I realized that I actually wanted to be the main parent. I was kind of whining about being, my husband not doing half of the work, and then realized I didn't actually want him to do half of the kid work. And so I made choices according to that. I think, what Rita says is true. I kind of tortured myself by saying, well, I should be at home with the kids all the time. And then, I think I had a nurse say that, your kids are going to be proud of you. And, the realistic thing was I couldn't be at home anyway, half of the time. So, you have to really know what is realistic and then know where you want to be at different times. So I really worked very flexible work schedule. I worked part-time, and that was driven out of necessity from a child that didn't sleep. And so I was going to quit or else work part-time. Then 2, I worked out a flexible schedule that would work for me. So I worked, I think it was like Saturdays and Fridays or something in exchange for knowing what kind of work schedule I was going to be. And I was very organized. I kind of plotted out what a normal mother would do, how many times they would put their kid to bed. And I checked off all of these boxes. So I scheduled my kids in as if they were a shift. And I would schedule, afternoons with them, and also made choices about, I would go to one conference a year and only one. And then also tried to like bring my kids with me. And then, like Rita said, had a community, everybody at work, would help each other. People up and down my street were not safe from, just taking a kid because I had forgotten something. And, we had triple coverage childcare. But, I think for everybody, just know that there are different stages, you'll have different needs, and things will change and they will get better.
Thanks, you. And Marianne, did you want to go next?
Similar to mastering, balancing life and children, not really mastered. I will say that I finished residency in 96, so I'm a little younger than Rita, but not by a ton. And in my generation, men didn't stay home, right? But my husband stayed home full time. And that was kind of this joint decision we made based on looking at his income versus my income. And that was kind of the practical choice. And he actually stayed home for 17 years. I think things that would have helped me to know ahead of time is kind of something that Dr. Yuen Wang was just talking about, in that there are stages, and that initial stage of child rearing where the child is completely dependent on you for absolutely everything, warmth, food, and everything else, goes away, but our levels of anxiety sometimes don't. But understanding that, all of that sleepless infant night turns into toddler energy and running, but yet a little more independent, don't have to be physically attached to you all the time. That goes to like the preschool stage where they actually leave the house for periods of time and other people take care of them. And then you're into the kindergarten stage where, they really have kind of their own little lives. And it's about how do you coordinate your lives and their lives. And for me, I had a son who had a lot of learning challenges, and we were meeting in a public school system. We were, until he finished high school, meeting with all of his teachers minimum probably 4 times a year. And there was, 504s involved and all this educational pressure that we were trying to working on, helping him not be too pressured, but to be able to get through education. That was a full on court press. And so also understanding that the kid you have may not be, something that's going to be like an easy slide through. You may have to pick up a heavy weight connected to that. That being said, it would have been cool to know that those stages existed ahead of time, which I didn't. And, with kid number 2, it became a little bit easier because I knew it a little bit better. But that would have been interesting information to have. And somebody mentioned going to conferences. You were mentioning, I think, Dr. Yuen Wang. I started bringing my kids to conferences super early on, probably around age 10 for Sarah Lena and maybe 12 or 13 for Jeremy. And a big part of that was the idea that they should see what I was doing. I would bring them to medical student events. Like Jeremy learned how to draw blood probably around age 7. One of the real class moments of this son of mine was we are doing intubations. Jeremy's probably 5. So it's an intubation workshop. And so there's these very sweet young medical students came over to Jeremy and said, "Oh, are you going to try?" And Jeremy's already done this, right? So he's like, "Try. Why? You don't know how to do this? I know I can do this." So, just inspiring confidence from an early age. So I think it was really good for my kids to understand why I left them and what I was doing, and that I had purpose, but also was able to go to all their school events. I worked at a place where people were very cool about shift changing and all the rest of it. And, I didn't miss a parent teacher conference. Did I miss a lot of sleep? Yes. That I missed. And I think I would have been in retrospect, I would have been a lot kinder to myself on the sleep and essentially like nutrition stuff, right? Because I gained a bunch of weight and that's not super healthy for me. And I'm well aware of that now. But I think those are things where I probably paid the penalty for carrying a little bit too much of the stress of the whole thing.
Yeah, so if I could go next to echo what Marianne said, I think the question to us really is not how you balance during your different stages of career, but it's really how you balance your different stages of your kids' development. So if you have kids, it's really, for me, it's, there is no balance. Let's start with that. For everybody listening, if you can balance it, you've just written a book on it because there's no balance. It's like walking into the emergency department. That's what your life is going to be. And this is what we do best. So it's going to be awesome. You got to just own that it's going to be crazy and weird. But I think it's the different stages of your kids. For example, when your kids are young, I think bedtime is number one priority. So I was okay doing the early shifts because that's okay. But I wanted to be home for bed. Journal clubs at night, I didn't go to. If you spend all your time in the days going to, lectures and doing your shifts, it was a hard no that I would not be going to journal club in the evening. And it was just known. So you just have to establish your boundaries, and that's okay. When they got to be like middle school for events, Ewan might have mentioned, or Marion might have mentioned it, like parent teacher conferences. I didn't ever want it to miss those things. I also didn't want to miss the days where they had like fun days where you brought in treats. And I will tell you a story. One time I had a pediatric resident was sitting beside me and she just looked really stressed out. And I said, well, what's going on today? And she says, I had to bake a turkey for my, preschool class. They're having some Thanksgiving dinner. I looked at her, I go, why did you bake a turkey? Why don't you just pick up turkey slices on the way from the store? I go, oh, kids don't care if you baked a turkey or you took turkey slices. They just want you to be there. So my advice to y'all is don't overextend yourself for things that don't matter. You don't need to bake cookies. You can pick them up at the store. You don't need to bake a turkey. You can pick up turkey slices and they will love you being there. So for me, it was the balance between the stages of life and my career, because I'm all in 100% of my career every day, no matter what stage they are, just how you do that.
And just to add on to that, I think that's incredibly valuable. I think when the kids were little, the other thing sort of going along with that was thinking about, I was constantly comparing myself to all the other stay-at-home moms. And I really had to give up the notion of what that looked like. One day when my oldest child was in kindergarten, after I'd taken one of my few days off and volunteered at school, and I ended up like mindlessly pulling out these pages from their workbook. I'm like, this is not worth it. My kid didn't care that I was here. I spent all day. I'm sort of miserable and angry, and I'm never going back again. And I never did. I mean, and it was okay. Nobody suffered as a result of that. And I think my husband and I really try to be intentional about where can we get the value in outsourcing things versus where is it important for us to be present. And I think as we have moved on to a different phase, so we have done something very different there, and it sort of goes with one of the other questions, but became a point in time when it was really time for me to make a career change. And so when my middle child was a rising senior in high school and my younger child, I describe him as my midlife crisis baby, was much younger, it wasn't a great fit with the job. I was looking for a growth opportunity. And so we actually live in two separate places, about 3 hours apart, and commute back and forth on the weekends. And so that really required a significant shift in how we function together. But I actually think we probably have much better balance. When I am at work, it doesn't matter. Sometimes I stay at work in the office till 11 at night. No one cares that I'm there. But when I am home on the weekends, I really try to be present with them. There was a lot of navigating. I think my middle child there was a whole year of, wow, I heard your parents were getting divorced. And she's like, wow, I haven't heard that at all. I had no idea. And it was sort of the running joke in our house, but it's really worked well for our family. And I think particularly for my oldest two kids who are girls, it's been a great sort of opportunity for them to see my husband and I balance our careers together and sort of both of us take turns when there are things that are important for us, but also recognizing that, I shared with the group earlier, today my adult child had knee surgery and I was able to be there for her as well. So there are things that come and you just have to decide what's important.
That's wonderful. Thank you all for your inputs. We'll go to the second question then, which is, did you face roadblocks or hurdles that led to career altering decisions? And we would love to hear like how that impacted you and, how challenging it was at that point as well.
Since I led off with some of that intro, I will sort of maybe morph into that and let others. So everyone has roadblocks in their career. And I think those are really the growth opportunities for us. It's the opportunity to grow, develop, change, and do something different. And I think that's the beauty of, particularly in academic emergency medicine, is you get to reinvent yourself about every 5 years and do something and shift. And I think regardless of where we are, we really need to think about that piece of it. And I think to me, there were two major shifts in my career. One is out of residency. I convinced my husband to return to my hometown where I thought, I would engage in a community emergency medicine practice and it would be this fulfilling career. And it turns out I wasn't really that happy doing it. So I managed there were about 5 years. I actually ended up working at an outpatient clinic for a year of that before transitioning back. And I actually worked fewer clinical hours and fewer total hours at that point in time than any other point in time in my career. And I was probably the most unhappy. So I think that's the other important thing, is that the hours worked do not equate to the happiness in your job and professional satisfaction. And so to me, it really took a lot, because I think you cement in your mind what your career is going to look like. And sometimes changing that, at least for me, was incredibly difficult and it was scary. And that was the first time in my life that I didn't have a plan as to exactly what I was going to do next. And so, being able to morph and adapt. And then after being in academics, I really had an incredible mentor who ultimately left. And then the person in that position was not nearly as supportive. And this was not on the emergency medicine side, but this was more on the sort of my academic job side. And it was really a struggle to me because I was incredibly committed to the institution. I loved my EM people and the people I worked with. This is a place where I had trained and I had gone back. But that was really a time for me. I probably, honestly, without that push, would have been pretty complacent in a job and might have gotten stuck. And so, what it did was really push me out of my comfort zone and made me start thinking about what are the other opportunities out there. And so, I think that to me is one of those things. These are the biggest opportunities of my career, even though in the heat of the moment it did not feel that way. But really embracing those are really sort of, I think, incredible growth and stretch opportunities for us to think about how do we reinvent ourselves, what's important to us, and really making sure that our careers actually align with our values.
I would love to follow that one up because I think Luann hit it right on the head. I think I was talking to Derek Cass actually about this a little bit this week, and one of the challenges is that I think, especially so as women, I think we can often be very emotionally loyal to the place that we're working. And then when you overlay that with the fact that when we're finishing residency, it's often around the time when we have young families and so may not be feeling the most secure about moving around and changing. And we end up being stuck is a very strong word, but loyal, I think, is maybe a good word. And I was at the same place after I finished residency for 20 years. There was a shakeup in leadership, and actually a whole group of us left all at the same time. And I think that was probably a good thing for me. That didn't feel as much like a roadblock. Like that was a very conscious decision. But the job that I went to after that, and I've not been secret about this in any way, shape, or form, I had good bosses until I was 50 years old. Were they ideal? No, nobody's ideal. But in general, I had bosses that aligned well with my goals, my desires. They were supportive in whatever ways they could be. I'm talking from lifeguarding at age 16 all the way through to age 50 when I basically left this other job because the bosses changed. I went to a place where I was brought in to bring the program from an AOA to an ACGME program as the program director. And it was a hell of a learning opportunity on all different levels. I learned really well about, the challenges of being a program director, dealing with all the paperwork, all the other pieces that go along with it. And that was really valuable to me. I did that for the first year when I transitioned. I also had great value to this boss because this boss really needed this thing to go through, and like whatever I needed, he was happy to help. Da 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 da. And then things changed because he didn't really need me as much anymore. He needed me a little bit for the next couple of years, but he felt like I was basically interchangeable, and he had a leadership style that I had not ever seen before. There was a lot of pulling me in the office. There was a lot of screaming at me. There was for things that I did not think were screaming about at all. And like just super what I felt was certainly not behavior that I could tolerate in the long term. You know, we can all debate whether that's a leadership style or maybe he shouldn't have. But I learned so much about myself in that because it was, first of all, super hard for me to decide to leave again, but he gave me this opportunity, as Luann said, to make a different choice. But I also learned about my leadership style and why it was different from his and how people think about leadership style. So I think all of those challenges end up being incredible opportunities to learn more about yourself, learn more about what you value, learn more about what you think is important. I would emphasize keep up your network. Like things like this, things like SAM, things like AEM, things like ASAP, whatever it is that you do, it's important to maintain those connections. I essentially, put out a message to 5 of the people who had been at the job that I had left, and they had all left too, and ended up landing very solidly on my feet. But a lot of that was because people knew who I was and what I was going to bring to a place. But keep up your networks, keep up your connections, and even in the most challenging setups, first of all, don't be afraid to leave. If leaving is the right thing to, don't be afraid to leave, but don't think about what you want in the next position. Yvette Calderon gave me great advice where she said, people, you got to talk about what you're going to, not what you're leaving. And I think that really allowed me to take a solid 6 months to figure out what I wanted to develop and build at this new place. And it worked out great. So don't be afraid to leave.
I'll speak. So I think, I'm not sure I realized it immediately. I came to the place that I worked for most of my career after being at the place that had gone to college, medical school, residency, and then was on faculty there for 5 years. And then my husband and I decided that we wanted to move back here to Cleveland to raise our kids near family. And because emergency medicine was a pretty young specialty at the time, it meant that there weren't really a bunch of us around. And that meant that when I joined, my department chair was the same age as me, but he had gone to a 2-year residency program and I had gone to a 4-year residency program. And it was, he was a good boss in most ways. And I won't say anything other than that because I still do shifts there. But I realized pretty early on that he was, and I was brought there to start a residency program, which I did. But because we were the same age and both sort of looking to grow in our careers, it became clear to me in pretty short order that he was very supportive of me as long as I didn't outdo him. And so that kind of turned the direction of my career. I knew I was going to be very involved, obviously, because I was the residency director. I was very involved with the institution, but I knew that I was going to have to turn my interests a little outward. And that's how I wound up getting very involved with SAM and ABEM, because I wasn't going to advance in our institution unless he advanced first. And, I didn't necessarily want my career to be stifled by his. So I would say that worked out really well for me because we were both able to be very successful going our own directions and not stepping on each other's toes. Thanks.
All right, I'll jump in. I'll take a little bit different liberty on this one. So some barriers that I've hit that have kind of had altering career trajectories. Like I mentioned before, I'm full speed, 100% go for it. And that has unfortunately caused some big changes, but have turned out great. The first one was when I was working about 10 years in an institution, and I felt like I had hit the glass ceiling. And it'd been years and again, on fire, ready to change the world. And I just didn't feel like I was going anywhere. And there certainly were other alternatives at that time. But instead, I literally took a job across the country, had never been out of Michigan before, and took a job across the country because I just felt like there would be nothing there. When certainly in hindsight, there probably was something around there, but it ended up to be one of the greatest moves of my career. So that was one barrier. It turned out great. The other thing I'll say is, and again, I talked about the kids and I always wanted to be with them. So one night I put them to bed and it was probably 10 o'clock at night. And I sat down on the couch and I took out my computer to do some work, as we all do. Everyone's in bed. And my husband looked over and it was just, it was life changing. He said, I knew it was going to be hard to be married to a physician. I had no idea it was going to be this hard because I was always working. And that was like a light bulb in my head went off that said, something's got to change. And at that time, I was associate program director. And the next day I went to my program director and said, I just can't do this anymore. And again, in hindsight, I probably should have recognized I was getting burned out and really burning the candle at both ends. And there were certainly other alternatives, but it pushed it to the limit and then had to have a, direct change. So my advice to you all is just recognize when it's getting too much and take it back a little because there are alternatives. You don't have to hit the rock bottom before you make a change. You can make a change before then, or you can make a huge change. That's okay. It might work out great, but it might not. So, and the last barrier I would say, and I would bet every single person on this call, and I bet all these very successful women have the same thing, and it's imposter syndrome. 100%. Even at my stage of career, I still wonder why I'm even on this panel. So, you guys own it. Everyone on this webinar right now, you are amazing. People do amazing things. Own it.
I love that. I was trying to think of how to get out of this panel this morning because I wasn't sure if I belonged on it. So, exactly. I think all of you all have said what I was thinking, which is, these roadblocks or hurdles really provide us an opportunity to really grow and, view them as challenges that for the better. I think I was thinking about the challenges as being three things. One was job related. So I was hired at Stanford with kind of this idea that I would be one of the founders of the pediatric emergency medicine group. And I was really excited and went to speak with the chair. And he asked to see my CV. And he said, Ewan, you don't have any publications. You don't have any research. We're not going to ask you to stay, let alone promote you. And it was kind of devastating because I thought I was pretty good and I was a good teacher and good clinically, but I'd never read the job description and I didn't really realize that academic emergency medicine involved research. But he told me what I needed and I've always been very grateful to know that's what I needed to stay at Stanford. He also helped me, design a fellowship, give some funding so I could learn how to do research. But, so that was a huge hurdle or challenge. And what I think was really important was being open to doing something I'd never done before, which was research instead of education. The second challenge was my second daughter who didn't sleep, as I've mentioned before. So I was kind of psychotic, didn't know what to do, couldn't do shifts, couldn't think, so I was just like, okay, I'm going to quit. And a friend of mine said, well, there's something called family leave. I took family leave and, my daughter started sleeping within like 1 month. And then I was trying to figure out what to do. And again, realized that, like one of you had said, just enough was enough. And I asked to go part-time. And so I was either going to go part-time or quit. So I was allowed to go part-time. I stayed part-time until I got my research grant funded. And it was the best thing ever. But, along with that came the knowledge that I wasn't going to be promoted that quickly. So I was promoted to associate when to full professor when my oldest daughter graduated high school. So it was kind of momentous. But that was okay. And then the last thing was that, I've been at Stanford all of my career and helped develop the PCM section. And we've had some changes. And there came a point where I realized, I don't want to do that. I have other interests and other priorities, and was at a time where I could actually retire. So I retired out of clinical emergency medicine, but I'm still very active in the medical school. So I'm getting to do the teaching that I was told I couldn't do before, and doing other research projects with, in collaboration with pediatrics and other departments. So, when I looked at the title of this, the longevity of your career in emergency medicine, it really, I think like with Rita, really spanning the whole breadth of that space.
I guess one big takeaway from everyone's stories, I feel like, is that growth mindset. I really like that resonating with me. Like the challenges are not really setbacks. It's really a place to grow and see what else you can do. Okay, our last question. How did you advocate for yourself throughout your career, such as for leadership positions, promotions, or even time off? I think we covered some of this, but I guess in our last 15 minutes, if we could cover what we haven't talked about.
I would say I would start with really poorly advocating, and such that when I took that first academic job, I actually negotiated. I'm like, I had two small children. I was like, I want to work fewer hours, and I'm willing to take a pay cut for that, but I want to work fewer hours so I can be home more. But then I took on all these responsibilities and I didn't work fewer hours. And so I actually waited the full year. And then by that point, I was really delivering on things. And then I'm like, okay, now I want the full money. Like, I want to be paid what I deserve to be paid. But, I think for me, part of it is I'm not necessarily good at sort of advocating and sort of constantly asking, but I do think that the slow and the steady of getting things done and having that track record of getting things done actually sets you up for that when you do ask the question of like, I want to take this on, that you really set yourself up for success. That being said, I've taken on a lot of things that my chairs along the years have asked me to do that I wasn't really always excited about, but that I knew that was sort of the means to the ends. It was an opportunity to prove that I could get that job done and that the next opportunity would come. And I think some of that, it's the balance between you don't want to say yes to everything, but sometimes you do have to say yes to things in order to get the next opportunity. And I think that about that compared now when I'm in the job of sort of negotiating time for education and teaching. And there are some people who ask and advocate for themselves constantly, but they don't deliver. And those aren't the people that you're going to give opportunities to. And so thinking about what that looks like, making sure that you have set yourself up for delivering and doing a good job on the things that you have committed to, really, I think, pays such large dividends so that when you do go and you're like, this is the thing that I've really been dying to do, I really want this, that you have this track record of success, that then people are willing to give you that larger opportunity.
I'll go next. I think how you advocate for yourself really depends on the stage of your career and your confidence level. It's a lot easier to advocate the less you have to advocate for. So the higher up you get, it's a lot easier to advocate. So might really have advice, because I will echo Luann and say, I didn't do it well for a long time. And I am much better at telling people how to do it well than doing it well myself. But this is the advice I would give people: is business. When you're advocating and negotiating, it's just business. Don't take it personally and don't get personal about it. It is business. Do your research. Do it well, talk to people. Don't go into a business deal or an advocation, negotiation system, a negotiation meeting unprepared. So just do your research, practice, get someone to practice, get one of your colleagues that you trust to really hit you hard with some questions and practice. Because once you say them a couple times, they really do come out as objective and not subjective, and you won't be caught off guard. I know one of the questions is on mentoring, and I would say get a mentor. get a sponsor. Well, a sponsor will usually get you, but get a mentor, because they are just invaluable at advancing your career, your pay, your research, your publications. And the evidence shows that they are key. And that's it. I think just be confident and know that business is business, and advocate for yourself. No one can advocate for yourself better than you can.
I am happy to speak. I think I was not good at balancing, or not good at advocating for myself. I think actually one of the things, kind of going back to the concept of having a mentor, I really think I have kind of, I think they, I think the kids today call it like a board of directors, where you get essentially a peer group that you bounce these ideas off of. And I think that was a very powerful tool for me to learn how to do that. And someone also told me very early on, I think it was also Yvette Calderon, again, back to her, kudos to Yvette, was interview every 3 years or so for other jobs. And no matter what and remember, I stayed at the same place for 24 years. So, but every 3 years or so, I would interview at other places and would just put myself out there repeatedly. And, I remember coming back to Paul Guinness and just after one of these interviews and thinking things would be great in another place, because, of course, I'd been in the same place all the time, not really appreciating how every place has their troubles, and saying to him, you've really created this amazing place. And I went to this job and this is what they told me. And these are the things they would, make available. And you've really done a great job setting this up. He was the chair at the time and had been my program director. The other benefit towards interviewing at other places every 2-3 years is that you find out vicariously what you're worth through what they're offering you. But you also may see, even if you choose to stay where you are, you may choose to adapt some of the stuff that they bring up as options for like how they do stuff. And this is how you learn how other things can be done if you don't actually even want to leave your place. Obviously, if you leave a place, you have to learn new skill sets, new approaches to things, but it's worthwhile to do something like that just to even see what's out there. And that allows you to advocate better for yourself.
I would agree with what you guys have all said already. A couple of the things that I found that were a little different was initially I was the only woman in our department, and the guys were afraid to speak up to him. And they always wanted me to be the one to bring up a difficult issue. And, I was happy to do that, at least in the beginning, until I realized that also kind of marked me as a troublemaker, because they would say, oh, we have to bring this up at our staff meeting. I'd bring it up, and then none of them would say anything. And that was a bit unpleasant for me. The other is choose your battles. If it's something that's small and really not going to make a difference in the short run or the long run, it's not worth fighting about, because you really need to advocate for what's important to you and to your department and for your patients. A lot of people I found spent a lot of time whining, sorry to use that term, but about things that just didn't matter. And, when it came to something big, people didn't listen because they were always complaining or, advocating for something that really didn't matter. So thank you.
I think I'm the last. I never advocated for myself very well at all. I think in terms of leadership positions, I stayed at Stanford my whole clinical career, and I went into pediatric emergency medicine as the associate director and never ever wanted to be the director. That being said, I helped hire my director and we complement each other perfectly. And it was where I wanted to be. In terms of promotion, again, I went up late and I have no recollections of advocating for myself for time off. But what I can say is that now I think I advocate well for others. And I think of others as, how do you want this world to be for my daughters, okay, or my students? And I think that if you have to advocate for yourself, sometimes makes it easier than doing what you should be able to do, which is just treat it as business. But I find that's hard. I think also know that all of you have power to advocate for those who are coming just a little bit behind you or that you're working with, and you don't have to advocate. I think if you advocate for yourselves in group, it's also a lot easier, to work as a community for what you need. I always remember with a little bit of shame, I was in the fishbowl or something, and I heard some of the younger women faculty talking about how, they were trying to be on call while they were on maternity leave, or they're trying to pump. And I'm just like, I remember thinking, wow, 15 years, nothing has changed. And really feeling and then out of that, we developed an early parent policy for our faculty. But, it took just realizing that nothing had changed and that, I was a little bit beyond that. So you could see straight, so you could ask to make a policy. So just, I think advocacy might have you might think about it as advocating for yourself in a certain way, but, group, working together as a group to achieve something for yourselves, I think is important.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists. We do have just a few more minutes left. I'm going to share the screen with a QR code just as we close here. If there maybe, I don't know, with 4 minutes, if there's any final comments, anything our panelists want to share that we weren't able to share, anything else in our final time?
Yes, and really quickly, the reason why we have this QR code and this Word document is we want this to be the start of a discussion, not the end of it. So we are hoping, and we are collaborating with the administrative academic emergency medicine group as well in trying to see if there are institutional policies, essentially. We wanted to grow up to that point where we can actually do recommendations, kind of what Ewan was alluding to. That would require a lot of things. There's a lot of availability in terms of research as well for all this data that we have that AEM is, I think, going to collaborate with us on. So if you guys could, fill out the doc, and then maybe we can get you looped in and see what interests you have discussion after this webinar is over.
If I could end with a little piece of advice, I think it was, gosh, who said it? Rita might have said when she was the only woman in her department, and, probably much the same as all of us here. I was the only one for a decade in our trauma center for a while, for many of those years. And I would say for anyone, just don't feel alone when you're having difficulty or stressed or feel like no one has ever had the problem you're having. Someone has reach out to, certainly to any one of us. I'm sure when we talk about mentoring and advocating, we'd be happy to talk to you, but you have colleagues right beside you who have probably felt the same. So just don't get to the point of, of despair, like reach out for help. We've all been there in some form or another.
And I think recognizing that the groups that are available, whether it's through SAEM and the women's group there, or ASAP and the women's group there, or AEM has a very strong women's group as well, those are things that weren't necessarily available to the more senior of us group when we were first coming up, but they are now. Right, they are, and you should definitely pick those brains. We actually are just establishing the first women's division of emergency medicine at my institute right now. So we're dealing with a lot of stuff that has to do with, childcare policy and maternity policy and protocolizing and things like manual vacuum aspiration in the emergency department. It's a lot of cutting edge topics, and realize those conversations are going on, and you can find people who will talk about them. Feel free to reach out to me anytime.
Ditto.
And let me just say one thing with 1 minute, sorry to monopolize, but yeah, I never thought I had mentors because nobody looked like me, and it's only over the years that I've realized that there's so many amazing people. I love to listen to stories, and I love to just talk to people and find out how they got where they did and what they were doing. And in some way, those were all kind of mentors that helped me decide, oh, I could do this or that. And so I think, for everybody, just reach out. I think most people, all of this panel, but in general, I think many people want to tell their stories, are very happy, and feel like, if they can help out, they would, but they just don't know. So, just talk to people.
I would like to again thank our panelists, our esteemed panelists for joining us and for sharing their stories and their journey and their career and how they've made it through the career and accomplished so much. It's amazing. And I learned a lot. So thank you so much. Thank you to our audience members, our attendees. And if you didn't get the QR code, the link is also in the chat. I would love if you could fill that out. And please reach out to Angel or myself if you have questions or feedback. We would love to hear from you.